Chapter 9. Incidents and Emergencies in Correctional Facilities. Unit 1. Identifying Critical Incidents. Lesson 1. Responding to a Critical Incident. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify and respond to critical incidents. Think about this. Several inmates are fighting in the courtyard. An officer tries to break up the fight, but the number of inmates involved keeps increasing. What should the appropriate response have been in this situation? As a correctional officer, one of your most important responsibilities is to apply your knowledge, training, and reasonable judgment when an incident occurs. Your top priority is to ensure the safety and security of everyone involved. Any incident has the potential to escalate into a critical incident, so it is crucial that you are able to identify security threats right away and are well-equipped and trained to respond. While general incidents are unforeseen or unplanned events which may or may not have consequences, critical incidents are events that have a high chance of putting lives at risk and causing major damage to property and the environment. They can occur due to an event in nature or as a result of human acts or error. Examples of critical incidents that occur due to natural events include hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and wildfires. Human-instigated critical incidents include active shooter events, hazardous material spills, or bomb threats. Critical incidents require a strict, urgent, and immediate response. When a critical incident happens, you must use good judgment to respond effectively. You and other staff must stay flexible and adapt to changes without having a negative impact on facility operations. Be aware that incidents like a disturbance, a disaster, or an escape attempt could lead to critical incidents, so managing them should be a top priority. Each type of critical incident will vary in the specific procedures that you will need to follow, but there are general procedures to follow for responding to a critical incident that will apply in most cases. Common procedures will include making preparations, verifying the critical incident, following chain of command, determining the appropriate level of response, setting up a perimeter, conducting evacuations, and resolving the critical incident. Post-critical incident procedures will usually include debriefing and documentation. Many agencies will also provide information for locating resources that can help with stress management and trauma. In any critical incident, make sure to follow your agency's policies and procedures. Preparing for a critical incident. You may not always be able to predict when a critical incident will occur, but preparing beforehand can play a large role in helping to resolve critical incidents successfully or lessen their impact. Planning is also key to making sure that you can respond quickly when a critical incident disrupts the normal operations within a facility. Familiarize yourself with your agency's policies, procedures, and critical incident plans, as well as post orders, which are job-specific documents that outline how to handle daily responsibilities and operations. During critical incidents, you may be assigned additional tasks that could include setting up perimeters, using a radio to communicate, conducting evacuations, and applying use of force when necessary. Knowing your facility's layout, evacuation routes, and the locations of emergency exits and equipment will help you in carrying out these duties. Verifying the critical incident. Identify what information to convey during a critical incident. When you are the first responding officer on the scene, you will want to verify the type of critical incident and properly assess the threat while using discretion and caution. Along with the type of critical incident, assess the severity of the critical incident and whether major or minor damages and losses have occurred. Communicate with control room staff, command post personnel, and supervisory staff to coordinate a response in line with the critical incident plan. Be prepared to describe the nature and location of the critical incident. For example, report the number of people involved, the nature of any injuries, and if hazardous materials or weapons are involved. Keep in mind that a critical incident can also involve more than one type of incident. Inmates can intentionally create incidents as distractions to accomplish other purposes. For example, inmates could use a fight as a distraction during an escape attempt or as a cover for other illegal acts. Following the chain of command. Describe the protocols for chain of command during a critical incident. During normal operations, the chain of command establishes a hierarchy for decision-making that keeps a facility running smoothly. However, in a critical incident, the chain of command serves an additional purpose. It outlines the coordination of resources as well as protocols for managing an incident. Your agency critical incident plan will determine the protocols for the chain of command and identify the officer in charge of incident management. Typically, the first officer to respond must take charge of the scene until relieved by command staff. The officer in charge of the scene is also responsible for keeping command staff updated about the status of the critical incident. This allows for a rapid response, while still ensuring that command staff are receiving all communications and approving all major decisions during a critical incident. Once someone higher in the chain of command comes onto the scene, the responding officer will transfer command over to them. When you are the one responding, make sure to follow your agency's policies and procedures. Always operate within the chain of command, and keep supervisors informed of all activities. Determining the level of response. The severity of a critical incident will determine what type and level of response is needed, as well as what equipment to use. Each agency will have specific equipment for different critical incident responses, such as different types of communication devices, vehicles, medical equipment, and fire equipment. You should know where this equipment is located and maintain certifications for using equipment. While determining the level of response, examine the facts and practice good situational awareness and officer safety. Do not engage in unsafe behavior when approaching a dangerous situation. For example, do not investigate a suspicious item by touching or smelling it. If an incident poses a security threat, respond to the threat appropriately and notify a supervisor. The level of threat also determines the level of assistance. Determine when to call for assistance during a critical incident. You should request assistance if you could be overpowered in a situation or if a situation is not successfully being resolved. Assistance could come from on-site medical staff, additional responders, outside law enforcement, additional security staff, and emergency medical services, EMS. Additionally, you may request help from specialty teams such as a Correctional Emergency Response Team, CERT, which is an extraction team that is specially trained to handle violent and uncooperative inmates during incidents. Always follow your agency's critical incident protocol and chain of command. Setting up a perimeter. Explain how to set up a perimeter during a critical incident. Part of managing the scene of a critical incident involves securing and isolating the critical incident so that it does not spread to other areas. Limit movement of inmates, such as locking down the cell block or dorm. Restrict the isolation to a limited area if possible, depending on the severity of the incident. For example, an inmate suicide may require a facility-wide lockdown, with correctional officers ordering all inmates to return to their individual cell areas or bunks. Begin the process of setting up a perimeter by using structures such as internal gates, sally ports, roll gates, doors, and cross fences. Conducting evacuations. You may also need to evacuate everyone, including non-essential staff, as soon as it is safe to do so. Evacuation routes should take evacuees as far away from the threat as necessary and be accessible by the quickest and easiest route possible. Evacuations may not always be possible due to time constraints or other factors. Also consider that you may not have enough time to properly restrain inmates, or that you may need to combine groups of inmates that are not normally together. In such cases, it may be necessary to wait to begin an evacuation. Evacuating or isolating people from a threat may involve a lockdown. Lockdown can differ from agency to agency as it relates to the level of restricting movement or use of security measures. The following are some guidelines for conducting an evacuation. Obtain copies of inmate rosters for identification and counting. Give clear and concise demands. Move people in an orderly fashion to agency-designated evacuation routes. Do not use elevators for evacuation. Conduct an inmate count when reaching the evacuation area. Account for everyone who was in the facility. Each agency's critical incident plan, also referred to as an emergency plan, will include an evacuation guide for different incidents such as fires, floods, and hurricanes. Alerting the incident command system may be part of an agency's critical incident plan. The Incident Command System, ICS, is a systematic approach to command, control, and coordinate incident response, and it typically follows an established agency protocol and chain of command. Some critical incident plans developed under the ICS may require specific training. Depending on the nature of the critical incident, ICS will identify different levels of responses and specific teams that will respond. Resolving the critical incident. Explain how to help resolve a critical incident. Resolving a critical incident involves diffusing the situation and returning the facility to normal operations, although supervisors or special response teams are responsible for resolving a critical incident. Any staff member can play a part in these efforts. In response to a critical incident, you may be called upon to do the following: transport inmates, escort and supervise inmates or staff, use physical force or control, provide first aid, record events, serve as a witness in investigations, debrief. Each agency will determine the roles and responsibilities of its staff members and provide a critical incident plan. Any critical incident presents dangers, and there are liabilities in the actions and choices you make to keep everyone safe and secure. To reduce liability while resolving a critical incident, you must observe your surroundings, take note of activities as they occur, respond within the scope of your training, and use reasonable judgment while responding. During the deactivation and debriefing process, remember to review report details and confirm information for further investigation. Always be sure to practice officer safety. Documenting the critical incident. Discuss how to document a critical incident. Even if you are not directly involved in a critical incident, if you witness any part of it, you must submit a report about what you observed. Reports should be complete and accurate, as they may be needed for reference during an investigation or for other purposes. Make sure to document the details of the critical incident and any actions taken to help resolve it. When documenting a critical incident response, you should include details of the date, time, place, the people involved, and when people arrived and left. You will also need to document what time outside agencies such as emergency services were contacted and the scope, nature, and status of the critical incident. Each agency will determine the proper report format and provide guidelines for writing the report in a clear and concise manner. Finding support after a critical incident. Correctional officers are often subjected to high levels of stress, which can have a significant impact on their physical and mental well-being. However, this stress can be made worse during critical incidents such as a riot, fire, or natural disaster. These incidents can leave a lasting impact on officers, causing long-term trauma and emotional distress. The emotional impact of such incidents is normal and expected. It is common for officers to experience a range of emotions, such as fear, anger, guilt, and sadness, after experiencing a traumatic event. These emotions can be overwhelming and difficult to manage, so it is essential for officers to receive the proper support and resources to help them cope. Remember that the effects of trauma can persist long after the incident has ended. In some cases, an officer may develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which can have a significant impact on their ability to function at work and in their personal lives. If you are struggling after witnessing or experiencing a critical incident in your facility, please reach out to a colleague, a supervisor, or a licensed mental health professional. Your agency or facility should have an Employee Assistance Program, EAP, that you can use as a resource. Unit 2. Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 1. Riot Management. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a disturbance or a riot. Think about this. The number of fights between inmates has increased over the past 3 weeks. The inmates seem on edge and are complaining about the quality of food. "You guys better change this garbage food or else," one inmate says. What security concerns might arise from these situations? As a correctional officer, you will be tasked with maintaining the security of the facility and making sure that operations run smoothly and efficiently. In order to carry out this task, you must be prepared to respond to and manage conflict arising from inmates, especially when it results in a disturbance that can lead to a critical incident. Differentiate between a disturbance and a riot. A disturbance is any incident that disrupts the normal operations within a facility. Some disturbances, such as a food strike, inmates refusing to return to a work squad, or a fight between 2 inmates in a dorm, could be considered minor. These types of disturbances can usually be handled with minimal staff. However, it is important to take them seriously since disturbances can quickly escalate into a riot. A riot is a disturbance with uncontrolled violence by inmates, usually directed at the administration. An example of a riot could be fights breaking out in several locations at once, significant property damage, or hostage incidents. External support, such as local law enforcement, may be needed to contain or control a riot. Describe the conditions that could prompt a disturbance or riot. Conditions that may lead to a riot or disturbance can include overcrowding, racial tension, poor living conditions, STG activity, dissatisfaction with food, mail, medical services, policy changes, loss of privileges, and fights. You should be aware of indicators that precede a riot, such as changes in the behaviors of inmates, food hoarding, makeshift weapons being made, unusual groupings of inmates, and an increase in fights and requests for protective custody. An inmate may also share specific information about an impending riot or disturbance with you, or they may suggest that you take a specific day off. It is important to have a heightened sense of awareness when normal routines change and when inmates seem tense. Abrupt changes within the correctional facility, for example, if it gets too quiet or too loud, may be an indicator that a disturbance or riot is pending. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a disturbance or riot. Along with being aware of post orders and critical incident procedures, be prepared to use any equipment necessary to resolve a riot or disturbance. Equipment will vary according to each facility's resources, but can include restraints, chemical agents, electronic control devices, ECDs, and firearms, as well as impact weapons, helmets, shields, personal protective equipment, PPE, emergency keys, and communication devices. Standard procedures. Explain standard procedures for responding to a disturbance or riot. Disturbances or riots can be handled in similar ways. However, the level of response will be reduced for a disturbance. You will need to make quick decisions regarding exiting the area immediately or directing any non-essential staff to safety. Standard procedures for responding to a disturbance or riot include increasing communications among staff, freeing up additional staff and resources to respond simultaneously to the threat with appropriate use of force, and keeping the incident contained. You will want to take particular care with riots. Due to their nature, the critical incident can move into other areas. Procedures to contain a riot may involve using structures such as internal gates, roll gates, doors, and cross fences, and posting of additional security personnel. During a riot or disturbance, provide the control room with as much information as possible. Include the location, status, and scope, approximate number of inmates and bystanders involved, and any weapons involved. Post-riot procedures may include the following: accounting for all on-duty staff and visitors, checking the security of the facility, separating ringleaders and agitators, administering first aid to the injured, performing a strip search of all involved inmates according to agency policies and procedures, conducting an inmate count, debriefing staff, maintaining integrity of the crime scene, repairing damage, completing documentation, including criminal charges, returning to normal operations. Unit 2. Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 2. Escape Prevention. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to an escape or escape attempt. Think about this. An officer conducts a search of the same area every day at the same time. Several inmates notice this pattern and escape using tools that they created. How could the officer have prevented this escape? One of your responsibilities as an officer is to prevent escapes. Escapes commonly occur during participation in work release programs outside of the correctional facility or during transport, and escape attempts can also happen while an inmate is receiving medical care at a hospital. Note that an inmate who is in an unauthorized area has violated facility policy, but it does not necessarily mean that they have attempted an escape. An escape occurs when an inmate breaks free from custody. Describe the signs of an escape attempt and how to prevent it. Indicators that inmates may be attempting to escape include inmates going outside their designated area or engaging in suspicious behavior, such as making odd phone or electronic communications, creating maps and tools, altering inmate clothing, or altering the facility's structure. You can directly affect whether escape attempts occur by taking preventive measures. Some measures include conducting constant surveillance, keeping an unpredictable schedule, using mobile or stationary posts, and completing regular and irregular searches. Search inmates, their cells, and all general facility areas. Make sure that you identify and count inmates while conducting a search. You need to observe their surroundings and take note of irregular or unusual behavior. You must also monitor areas where inmates can escape, whether through ventilation access routes, doors taken off their hinges, or windows broken with projectiles. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment and resources for responding to an escape or escape attempt. While the necessary equipment that is used to prevent or resolve an escape or escape attempt may vary by facility, the following list contains the equipment and resources that are most commonly used. Canine teams, communication equipment, cameras or video equipment, vehicles, face sheets, identification of inmates, for example, pictures, aliases, or tattoos, information about known associates. Mechanical restraints, manual inmate counting and electronic identification devices, radio frequency identification, RFID, flashlights, local maps of the area, weapons. Standard procedures. When an escape occurs or is in progress, you or a group of officers will need to verify the location of the escape and possible escape routes. It is important to communicate effectively with supervisors and other staff members. Escaped inmates are considered dangerous. Therefore, take extreme caution. Standard procedures in the event of an escape may include the following. Explain standard procedures for responding to an escape. Securing all inmates as quickly as possible. Locking down the facility immediately to aid in searches and investigations. Different degrees of lockdown may be taken, such as in a specific location or agency-wide. Conducting a master roster count of the inmates to confirm an escape has occurred, and identifying the inmate that has escaped. Telling the control center or supervisors that an escape has occurred as soon as possible, including the number of escaped inmates, their names, clothing, and direction of travel. Securing and isolating the surrounding area and removing all inmates and uninvolved personnel from the suspected escape location. Keep the area clear because it is considered a crime scene. After the escaped inmates have been identified, collecting articles of their clothing without contaminating them. This is done by using gloves and storing the items properly. Canines will use these articles as scent items. Review mail and phone communications to determine possible destinations. If the escape happens outside the facility, such as during a work squad or transport, securing the remaining inmates and following standard procedures. Unit 2, Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 3, Hostage Incidents. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a hostage incident. Think about this. An officer hears a lot of commotion in the infirmary and goes to see what is happening. One inmate is holding a nurse hostage with a weapon. How should the officer respond? There may be times where you have to respond to a critical incident that involves a hostage or more than one hostage. These types of incidents can have the added pressure of knowing that the hostage might be someone you work with daily. However, it is important to stay calm and remember that the goal in any hostage incident is to resolve the conflict without injury or loss of life. Define what a hostage incident is. A hostage incident is when one or more people are held against their will by another person or group with the purpose of achieving a specific goal. Any person can be held hostage, including inmates, civilians, officers, visitors, and staff. Keep in mind that when you respond to an incident or a riot, you could also be taken hostage. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a hostage incident. It is important to know the various equipment available for responding to a hostage incident so that you can keep the incident under control and resolve it successfully. Equipment and technical assistance may vary among agencies and departments and will be based upon the conditions encountered and decisions made during the incident. In most cases, you will rely on communication devices such as radios, megaphones, or cell phones. Other necessary equipment could include restraints, chemical agents, impact weapons, emergency keys, and monitoring equipment such as camcorders, closed-circuit televisions, or cameras. Building blueprints and floor plans of the facility could also be required. Standard procedures. In a hostage incident, responses vary depending on agency resources, policies, and procedures. Steps taken during a hostage incident change according to the circumstances, status, and severity. Different teams may be involved, such as tactical and negotiation teams. Keep in mind that a hostage incident could last hours or even days. When initially responding to a hostage incident, contain the incident to prevent more hostages from being taken. Maintain a visual on the hostage, but do not enter the area and become a hostage yourself. Remove all inmates and isolate the area. Be careful not to agitate the hostage taker. Actively listen, but remember to keep your distance. Gather as much information as possible, including the location of the incident, the names and number of hostages, the names and number of hostage takers, if known, as well as any injuries, weapons involved, and demands of the hostage takers. Standard procedures for responding to a hostage incident include remaining calm, notifying a supervisor immediately, and following the chain of command, containing the hostage taker in the smallest area possible. Restricting the movement of the hostage taker, if possible, while keeping officer safety in mind. Gathering information, such as taking pictures or recording the incident. Moving non-participants as far from the hostage incident as possible, which may include a facility lockdown for inmates, providing assistance and support to specialized teams as needed. A staff member who is held hostage is not viewed as having rank or authority in the incident. This means that, if you are taken hostage, you must recognize that you have no authority to make any decisions. Do not interfere with discussions being conducted between response teams and the hostage taker. Always make sure to adhere to the proper protocol and resist the urge to act impulsively. Acting without thinking could make matters worse. Follow these procedures if you are taken hostage. Cooperate with, but do not enable, the hostage taker. Recognize that staff will respond as soon as possible. Avoid using insults or trigger words, words that may empower the hostage taker, such as prisoner, guns, or police. Avoid being confrontational by keeping a low profile. Avoid giving up your uniform, if possible. Keep your face down or avoid eye contact. Remain calm, rest when possible, and try to eat only food provided by the negotiating team. Cooperate fully with any response team member. Unit 2 Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 4. Bomb Threats. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a bomb threat. Think about this. During a routine search, an officer discovers a suspicious device that looks like a bomb. The officer immediately calls their supervisor using their radio. What problems could the use of the radio cause? You need to be alert and use good observational skills when responding to a critical incident that involves bombs or a bomb threat. A bomb threat is any threat of an explosive device, whether mechanical, incendiary, or chemical. You must take every bomb threat seriously and notify a supervisor as soon as possible. A supervisor or command staff will determine how the threat should be handled based on agency policy. In the meantime, all facility staff needs to maintain a heightened sense of awareness during the bomb threat. as it can also pose other security risks besides immediate injury or death. In some cases, a bomb threat may be used as a distraction for an escape attempt. Describe the indicators of a bomb threat. Look for something out of the ordinary, or anything that could indicate a bomb threat when performing routine inspections, searches, or facility checks. Indicators of a bomb threat may include the discovery of a suspicious device or package. You may also receive a direct bomb threat delivered by mail, phone, electronically, or in person. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a bomb threat. When responding to a bomb threat, you may use the following equipment: mounted long-range cameras or non-electrical communication devices such as landline phones, pens, pencils, and paper. Contact your supervisor, but do not use cell phones, radios, or any other electronic device that could emit electromagnetic signals, as these may create a spark. Outside agencies may use bomb-detecting canines or explosive ordnance devices, bomb-diffusing robots. Standard procedures. Explain standard procedures for responding to a bomb threat. If you discover a suspected bomb or suspicious package, do not touch, inspect, or tamper with it in any way whatsoever. Each agency will determine when to call 911 or when to contact a specialized response team. Facility staff should communicate verbally, in legible writing, or by using a landline phone. Stay calm and communicate clearly so that the control room and supervisory staff may coordinate response activities. Radios should not be used while a bomb threat is active or in progress. Standard procedures for responding to a bomb threat include the following: notifying a supervisor or command staff of the exact location of the device and its description, or if you receive a bomb threat. Stopping use of all electronic devices including microwaves, radios, phones, car alarms, or remote keys for cars, as instructed by supervisors or command staff. If you find a device, establishing a secure perimeter around the device. If you receive a threat, locking down the inmates and conducting a controlled search of the facility, following evacuation protocols according to your agency's critical incident plan. DIRT, if you receive a bomb threat via phone, following protocols such as using a checklist while talking, keeping the caller on the line, if appropriate, and using the telephone tracer feature on the phone. Unit 2, Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 5, Outside Facility Assaults. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to outside facility assaults. Think about this: several vehicles are approaching the facility at a high speed with no sign of slowing down. A few seconds later, gunshots are fired. What would be an appropriate response to ensure the safety of the facility? Critical incidents do not always take place exclusively inside the facility. Some may involve outside forces or assaults to the facility. A facility assault is a physical attack from outside the facility or any other assault that creates physical damage to the correctional facility. Attackers may be on foot, or the assault may include a speeding vehicle approaching the perimeter and failing to yield. Other assaults could include gunshots or an aircraft or drone flying nearby. Describe the indicators of a facility assault. Indicators of a facility assault may include a threat to a person's life or coordinated escape attempts. You should be aware of any threats to the security of the facility, including demonstrators, media, or high-profile inmates, such as inmates associated with a drug cartel or death row inmates. The arrest and transfer of high-profile inmates is a threat to security, as they may know people with access to technologies that could enable them to see the layout of the facility. Always be cautious of any unknown or unauthorized person near the perimeter of the facility. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a facility assault. Common equipment used for responding to a facility assault includes barriers, impact weapons, electronic control devices, firearms, shields, vehicles, megaphones, restraints, chemical agents, and communication devices. You may also need to use recording devices or cameras. Standard procedures. Describe the measures used to prevent and resolve a facility assault. While facility assault incidents are rare, high-quality and effective visible security measures, alert systems, perimeter controls, or appropriate warning techniques can help prevent facility assaults. Be aware of people who have permission to be on the facility grounds. Notify correctional staff of likely protests, staging areas for protesters or media, or the presence of outside agencies. Keep in mind that facility assaults can escalate into other types of critical incidents, such as a hostage situation, an escape, or a medical emergency. To contain an assault, some agencies may approve use of force. There may also be a show of force or a visible presence of authority. Staff assignments may vary according to an agency's resources or policies and procedures. But your ultimate responsibility is to maintain the order and safety of inmates within the facility, which may include locking down inmates. Depending on the incident, local law enforcement or external law enforcement, such as SWAT, may be contacted to contain incidents outside of the facility. The commander of ICS may also deploy specially trained teams, such as a CRT, in the event of a facility assault. Explain standard procedures for responding to a facility assault. Standard procedures for responding to a facility assault include the following: notifying the appropriate staff and communicating the following information with the response teams: the area of the compound or perimeter affected, the nature of the assault, the extent of the damage to the perimeter, the number of assailants, weapons, and equipment, e.g., drones or vehicles, the direction in which the assailants are traveling. Following evacuation protocols according to the agency's critical incident plan and moving inmates and staff members to a safe location. Be aware that an assailant may change tactics or methods that result in blocking or damaging planned evacuation routes. Pay attention to radio communications, including updates on the situation. Setting up barricades. Establishing perimeter security, including surveillance and locking down the facility. Maintaining safety and security procedures, such as moving to cover and relocating to a tactically advantageous position. Maintaining integrity of the crime scene. Debriefing after the incident. This may involve reviewing report details for further investigation. Unit 2. Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 6. Hazardous Materials. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a hazardous materials incident. Think about this while on a work detail. An inmate accidentally mixes bleach and ammonia. What immediate actions should be taken? In order to promote a safe environment for everyone, it is important that you understand how to manage any materials and sensitive supplies that, when mishandled, could be considered hazardous. Mismanagement of supplies could put the safety of inmates and others at risk. However, proper management of supplies, including the handling and storage of hazardous materials, can reduce the likelihood of a critical incident. In the event that a critical incident involving hazardous materials does occur, you must be familiar with their characteristics and the appropriate response for each type of hazardous material. Characteristics of hazardous materials. A hazardous material is any solid, liquid, or gas substance that, when released, may be capable of causing harm to people, the environment, or property. The term is sometimes abbreviated as hazmat. Hazardous materials can include cleaning agents, floor wax, bleach, laundry detergent, fuels, pesticides, glue, fertilizer, or gaseous chlorine. A hazardous materials incident occurs when hazardous materials are released into the surrounding environment. It is always considered a safety risk. Hazardous materials incidents can happen accidentally, intentionally, or as a result of other incidents such as a fire. If not properly controlled, they can quickly escalate into critical incidents that result in harm to many people. Hazardous materials incidents tend to be characterized as follows: may be more likely to require outside assistance, may require a multi-agency response, may be long-lasting, may involve unseen hazards. Safety risks and handling of hazardous materials. Be aware of the various ways in which exposure to hazardous materials can occur while supervising inmates. For example, while inmates are on work details, they could accidentally combine common chemicals, such as bleach and ammonia, and create a hazardous environment. Inmates may use containers to transport hazardous materials or biohazardous materials, such as urine. Other bodily fluids, including contaminated blood, saliva, or semen, could be considered hazardous materials. A group of inmates could deliberately work together and separately take items that are hazardous when combined. Be thorough in your searches when inmates return from work assignments. Explain the safety risks of hazardous materials. People can be contaminated with hazardous materials through inhalation, ingestion, absorption, and injection. Hazardous materials can pose immediate safety risks and long-term health hazards, such as asphyxiation, chemical burns, tissue destruction, cancer, or death. They can also cause harm to the environment, such as polluting water, air, and land, as well as causing death or serious injury to wildlife and domestic animals. While some hazardous materials may have a specific smell, others have no detectable odor at all, which means that you cannot rely solely on your senses to provide you a warning that something is wrong. Moreover, due to how dangerous it is to inhale or ingest a hazardous material, you must never check a container by smelling or tasting it. Instead, you may rotate a closed container to test its weight and consistency. For example, a shampoo bottle filled with bleach will feel and sound different than when it is filled with shampoo. If you are still unsure, you may consult a safety data sheet along with your agency's policies and procedures. Describe what a safety data sheet is and why it is used. A safety data sheet, SDS, is written or printed material concerning a hazardous chemical that is prepared in accordance with federal regulations. It is required for any hazardous material shipped to and from a correctional facility. An SDS includes the manufacturer's name, the product name, and the procedures for spills and leaks. An SDS typically has 9 sections that detail information about the chemical, the manufacturer, how to handle exposure to the chemical, and what to do in case of a critical incident. An SDS may be required wherever a potentially hazardous material is stored or used. The SDS will help you be aware of all hazardous materials in your assigned area and what they are used for. An SDS is essential for identifying and understanding information regarding a hazardous material and must be made available to staff and inmates. Federal regulations and Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) standards require that all chemical manufacturers and importers make SDS documents available to anyone who is exposed to a potentially hazardous substance. You should be able to read and understand the manufacturer's guidelines and the SDS to properly handle hazardous materials. You are responsible for consulting the SDS when it is applicable, as well as your agency's policies and procedures. Classes of hazardous materials. During a hazardous materials incident, the U.S. Department of Transportation's DOT Emergency Response Guidebook, ERG, is often used as a guide. A first responder's initial actions include the identification of hazardous materials, areas of personal protection, and an initial safety plan. The following is a list of the classes of hazardous materials and the dangers associated with each class according to the ERG, a copy of which will be made available to all staff. In total, there are 9 classes of hazardous materials. Identify the classes and dangers of hazardous materials described in the Emergency Response Guidebook, ERG. Class 1. Explosives. Explosives are materials or devices that are designed to release energy rapidly. Consider all explosives to be extreme hazards when they are involved in or near a fire. Examples of explosive materials include dynamite, black powder, and small arms ammunition. Class 2. Gases. Gases are materials that are neither solid nor liquid at ordinary temperatures, and they are usually contained under pressure. Gases may be further classified as flammable, non-flammable, poisonous, or corrosive. Examples include acetylene, hydrogen, and anhydrous ammonia. Class 3. Flammable and combustible liquids. Flammable and combustible liquids are materials that are neither solid nor gas that burn in the presence of an ignition source and are easily ignited by heat, sparks, or flames. Examples include gasoline, diesel fuel, and acetone. Class 4. Flammable solids. Flammable solids are materials that are neither liquid nor gas and burn in the presence of an ignition source or in the presence of heat or friction. Class 4 also includes substances that ignite spontaneously or when in contact with water. Examples include magnesium, sulfur, and calcium carbide. Class 5. Oxidizing substances and organic peroxides. Oxidizing substances or oxidizers are materials that supply their own oxygen and may cause spontaneous combustion or increase the intensity of a fire. Examples include nitric acid used in metal cleaners and bleach. Class 6. Toxic substances and infectious substances. Toxic substances are materials that can be considered poisonous and harmful to health. Exposure to a toxic substance in large amounts could potentially result in death. Infectious substances are materials that contain pathogens that can cause disease. Examples include insecticides, medical waste, and biological hazards. Class 7. Radioactive materials. Radioactive materials are materials that give off radiation, which can pose a risk to health if not managed properly. Examples include nuclear waste, radioactive medical materials, and X-ray equipment. Class 8. Corrosive substances. Corrosive substances are materials that are liquid or solid and can cause irreversible damage to human tissues, such as skin on contact. Examples include acids such as sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid. Class 9. Miscellaneous hazardous. Materials dangerous goods. Miscellaneous hazardous materials or dangerous goods are materials that do not belong to any of the other classes listed, but still present a hazard during transportation. These materials are subject to U.S. DOT regulations when being transported. Examples include lithium-ion batteries, dry ice, magnetized metals, and auto-inflating devices, such as airbags. Examples of hazardous materials. Hazard class. Class 1. Materials such as explosives. Examples include dynamite, black powder, and small ammunitions. Hazard class. Class 2. Materials such as gases. Examples include acetylene, hydrogen, and anhydrous ammonia. Hazard class. Class 3. Materials such as flammable liquids and combustible liquids. Examples include gasoline, diesel fuel, and acetone. Hazard class. Class 4. Materials such as flammable solids, spontaneously combustible, and dangerous when wet. Example: magnesium, sulfur, and calcium carbide. Hazard class. Class 5. Materials such as oxidizing substances and organic peroxides. Example: nitric acid and bleach. Hazard class. Class 6. Materials such as toxic substances and infectious substances. Example: insecticides, pesticides, regulated medical waste, biological hazards. Hazard class. Class 7. Materials such as radioactive materials. Example: radiopharmaceuticals, radioactive sources, such as those found in certain smoke detectors and medical devices. Hazard class. Class 8. Materials such corrosive substances. Example: sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid. Hazard class. Class 9. Materials such miscellaneous hazardous materials, which are dangerous goods. Example: lithium-ion batteries, dry ice, magnetized metals, auto-inflating devices such as airbags, asbestos, molten sulfur, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, hazardous waste. Describe the indicators of hazardous materials. Hazardous materials are indicated by placards, diamond-shaped signs, markings, shipping papers, SDSs, or storage containers. Refer to the ERG for exact information. Use extreme caution when using your senses at a hazardous materials incident, including vision. You may use your vision to see indicators of the presence of hazardous materials such as smoke, fire, vapor, or gas clouds. When light or visibility is poor, these signs are harder to see. For example, green smoke is a particularly dangerous sign. Watch out for hazardous material placards. Hearing. It is important that you use your hearing, especially when interacting with witnesses or identifying unusual sounds, such as hissing from a gas leak or a tanker spill, or a bubbling sound from mixing chemicals. Taste, touch, or smell. Use of these senses risks exposure to the substance. They should not be used intentionally in an incident. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a hazardous materials incident. Equipment. Each agency will determine the availability of equipment to use during a hazardous materials incident. Some of the equipment may include personal protective equipment, PPE, so as to observe standard precautions. Examples of PPE can include face masks, protective gloves, protective gowns, binoculars to identify warning placards, a hazmat suit, a self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, a blood-borne pathogens cleanup kit, and protective shields or barriers. Refer to the ERG for a detailed description of and instructions for the appropriate use of equipment related to hazardous materials incidents. Make sure your facility has the current versions of all reference guides. A supervisor or designated staff will manage the equipment, informational guides, and hazardous materials references. Standard procedures. Due to the dangers associated with hazardous materials incidents, be aware of your surroundings and take note of any unusual occurrences or activity. Be sure to practice officer safety and always follow the proper precautions. Each agency's policies, procedures, and critical incident plan will dictate the roles and responsibilities of each staff member. You may be the first person on the scene, but the resolution of a hazardous materials incident is the responsibility of supervisory staff and specialized response teams. As a correctional officer, you should respond only within the scope and level of your training and follow your agency's policies. When looking for hazards and investigating an incident, stay constantly aware and be prepared to relay information. Even when assisting in cleanup, you must follow officer safety, standard precautions, and the SDS where it applies. Avoid tunnel vision and be aware of the variety of complications that may arise because hazardous materials incidents can be dynamic and evolving. For example, do not immediately run over to assist if you suspect a hazardous materials incident. Consider all hazardous materials incidents as potentially life-threatening and proceed with caution. Remain calm and focus on a resolution. Explain standard procedures for responding to a hazardous materials incident. Standard procedures for responding to a hazardous materials incident include the following: locating and verifying the nature of the hazardous materials incident. Observe from a safe distance. If the spill is minor, respond according to the SDS guidelines, if applicable. For example, dilute a bleach spill and ventilate the area. Referring to the posted SDS, if applicable, for the hazardous materials. Make sure a copy of the SDS is readily available for any emergency personnel. Communicating with control room staff and supervisors who may coordinate response activities. Relay the following information: types of substances or hazards. Do not attempt to smell or taste the substance. Are areas affected? Any medical emergencies or injuries, wind direction. For example, if any vapor or smoke is blowing toward the dining hall. Isolating the incident so that it does not spread to unaffected areas. This includes shutting down air conditioning units and closing doors and windows, if applicable. Stay as far away as practical, a minimum of 500 feet if possible, and keep others away. Use binoculars or video surveillance if available, or approach from upwind. Do not take an ignition source into the affected area. A vehicle can be an ignition source. Creating a barrier or perimeter around and restricting access to the affected area until the area is declared safe by emergency personnel. Supervisors will issue a direct order for no one except emergency personnel to enter the area. Use signs, warning tape, and physical barriers, such as a mound of dirt, or officers stationed outside a secured area. Structures such as internal gates, roll gates, doors, and cross fences can greatly aid in accomplishing these efforts. Entering the area only when it is safe to do so. Use PPE, such as a face mask, protective gloves, and a gown, immediately. Use disposable equipment as much as possible. Observing standard precautions when dealing with decontamination efforts. Make sure that contaminated victims and equipment are decontaminated before you make direct contact with them. If you become contaminated, make sure that you and your clothing are fully decontaminated as soon as possible. Providing first aid for the injured. Separate contaminated people. Prioritize care based on severity of injuries. Evacuating areas affected by hazardous materials. Everyone should be evacuated as soon as it is safe to do so. Ideal evacuation routes will take people as far away from the incident as possible and be upwind and uphill from the threat. Follow the posted evacuation diagrams. Evacuation may not be possible in some cases. Keeping a record of the events and completing follow-up documents as directed by the agency. Sensitive supplies. Sensitive supplies refer to supplies used throughout the facility for health, sanitation, or housing maintenance. While not all sensitized supplies are considered hazardous materials, they have the potential to be easily misused. Therefore, it is especially important to record the identity of any person receiving sensitive supplies and make sure they are used properly. Sensitive supplies include medical equipment, medicine, industrial strength cleaners, or other substances used for different purposes in the facility. Some of those purposes are facility maintenance, vehicle maintenance, pest control, laundry services, and firearms cleaning. These supplies can pose a hazard or be easily misused. They may or may not be considered hazardous materials. Examples of sensitive supplies include, but are not limited to, the following: paints, fuel, oil, cleaning solvents, wax, window cleaner, gun oils, solvents, thinners, bleach. Sensitive supplies also include supplies for food service, such as cooking oils, vanilla, yeast, and nutmeg. These sensitive supplies must be controlled at all times. Inmates can produce illegal substances, such as alcohol, with yeast, sugar, and fruit. Pepper can be used to incapacitate a person. Nutmeg has intoxicating properties when used improperly. Explain how to store and move sensitive facility supplies. It is important to use supplies only for their intended purpose. Ensure that inmates who use sensitive supplies follow any listed instructions and precautions. Improper handling of sensitive supplies may result in items becoming contaminated or dangerous, which could result in injury or death. Sensitive supplies may become explosive if they come into contact with other chemical substances, or if they are exposed to temperature changes or movement. You must follow these guidelines to properly maintain and care for sensitive supplies. Issue and transport supplies according to the SDS. Use appropriate safety gear or protection, e.g. gloves, masks, eye protection. Only handle supplies after receiving the proper training. Never mix cleaning supplies. Be careful and thoughtful while moving supplies. Use a well-ventilated area when necessary. Close containers. Properly dispose of used cleaning supplies and cloths. Appropriately supervise the use of all supplies. To safely handle sensitive supplies, you must do the following. Store them in proper containers such as boxes, wooden, paper, plastic, drums, metal plastic, cylinders, metal plastic, and bags, multi-walled paper, multi-walled plastic. Follow inventory processes. Keep supplies clean and securely closed. Remove any substandard items. Always follow your agency's policies and procedures. Facilities often receive sensitive supplies in concentrated form. These supplies need to be diluted before use. Be aware of possible allergic reactions when supplies are handled or mixed. Each facility will also vary on how it identifies and manages requests and purchases of sensitive supplies by using logs, charts, and electronic databases. Unit 2. Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 7. Medical emergencies. Lesson goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a medical emergency. Think about this. You notice that an inmate is sweating, experiencing shortness of breath, appears pale, and is disoriented. How would you determine if this is a medical emergency, and how would you respond? Due to the fact that correctional officers must closely supervise inmates at all times, you will most likely be the first to notice and respond when an inmate experiences a medical emergency. In such cases, you must be prepared to provide care or access to medical care as part of your main responsibilities. Explain what a medical emergency is and how to recognize signs and symptoms. A medical emergency is when a person experiences medical or psychological distress, severe illness, or injury. Signs and symptoms of a medical emergency may include unusual or excessive bleeding, pain, sweating, nausea, shortness of breath, paralysis, paleness, disorientation, or loss of or altered consciousness. If an inmate uses medical devices such as intravenous, IV lines, or monitors, this equipment may become dislodged. Equipment. Each medical emergency is unique, so assess the situation to determine the proper equipment to use. Refer to first aid or other training to correctly use medical equipment and supplies during a medical emergency. Other staff, on-site medical personnel, or outside emergency medical services, EMS, may be called upon for further assistance and resources. Identify the necessary equipment and resources for responding to a medical emergency. Equipment available during a medical emergency may include PPE, such as gloves and masks, an automated external defibrillator, AED, Narcan, naloxone, and a first aid kit. Medical equipment must be used according to training and agency policy. Observe standard precautions to avoid contact with a person's bodily fluids. Treat every person as if they are infected to minimize risk of infection when providing aid. Standard procedures. Standard procedures for responding to a medical emergency include the following. Identifying the severity of the medical emergency to determine the level of response. Making sure that the area is safe and secure while enforcing crowd control by removing all inmates and uninvolved personnel from the area. Notifying medical staff and supervisors and informing them of the following: number of affected people, their location, the nature of the emergency. Administering first aid using PPE to observe standard precautions. Provide aid only within the scope of your training. Administer first aid as appropriate until medical help arrives. Protect inmates against self-inflicted injury or death. If an inmate has attempted hanging, call for assistance as the situation dictates. Proceed according to agency policies and procedures, whether the inmate is injured or deceased. Wait for assistance as necessary. Transporting the patient to a medical facility or, if applicable, designating staging areas for outside agencies. Unit 2, Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 8, Facility Fires. Lesson goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to a fire. Think about this. An inmate accidentally starts a grease fire in the kitchen and throws water on it in panic. How should you respond? The potential for fire exists in all areas of the facility. Though rare, fires are dangerous because they can spread quickly and can be difficult to contain. The kitchen is the most common area where fires occur. However, fires may also occur in other parts of the facility, such as a laundry area or dormitory. You should always be vigilant and cautious of fire hazards such as cooking grease, dryer lint, improperly stored cleaning agents, gas leaks, defective light fixtures, and lightning strikes. Remember that maintaining the safety of staff and inmates is the first priority during a fire. Describe the components and indicators of a facility fire. Most fires are preventable as long you know what to look for, so it is important for you to be aware of the ways that fires start, as well as the components and conditions that are needed for a fire to be sustained. When heat, fuel, and oxygen come together in a chemical chain reaction known as combustion, it creates fire. Removing any one of the necessary components of a fire can help to stop or extinguish the fire. Indicators of a fire include the smell of smoke, alarm notifications, and heat, light, and flame. You will need to familiarize yourself with the different types of fires that may occur, because the class of fire will determine which extinguishing agent is used and how the incident is approached. There are 5 classes of fire. Class A: fires in ordinary combustible materials such as wood, cloth, paper, rubber, and many plastics. Class B: fires in flammable liquids, combustible liquids, petroleum greases, tars, oils, oil-based paints, solvents, lacquers, alcohols, and flammable gases. Class C: fires that involve energized electrical equipment. Class D: fires in combustible metals, such as magnesium, titanium, zirconium, sodium, lithium, and potassium. Class K: fires in cooking appliances that involve combustible cooking media, vegetable or animal oils and fats. Make sure that you use the correct extinguishing agent for the class of fire. For example, using water on a fire with a flammable liquid such as oil will increase the fire. Likewise, using water on an electrical fire can increase the danger of electrical shock. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a facility fire. Each facility will determine the availability of specialized equipment used during a fire. The following equipment may be necessary to respond to a fire: portable extinguishers, fire alarms, fire suppression systems, such as fire extinguishers set into the wall that run into piping when the system is activated, sprinklers, and smoke detectors, self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, to prevent smoke inhalation, facility map with evacuation routes, emergency keys, restraint devices, fire hydrants, fire hoods, fire hoses that are used by specially trained staff to extinguish fires. The type of fire will determine which fire extinguisher to use. Types of portable fire extinguishers that are commonly used include the following. Differentiate between the types and uses of fire extinguishers. Type A, for use in fires with ordinary materials like cloth, wood, and paper. Type B, for use in fires with flammable liquids, combustible liquids, petroleum greases, tars, oils, oil-based paints, solvents, lacquers, alcohols, and flammable gases. Type C, for use in fires with electrical equipment, like appliances, tools, or other equipment that is plugged into an outlet. Class C fire extinguishers use an agent that does not conduct electricity. Type D, for use in fires with combustible metals, such as magnesium, titanium, zirconium, sodium, lithium, and potassium. Type K, for use in fires with vegetable oils, animal oils, and fats in cooking appliances. ABC, multi-purpose extinguisher that can put out Class A, B, or C fires. The portable fire extinguisher may be all that is necessary to extinguish a small fire. Basic procedures for using a fire extinguisher in a correctional facility will include performing a safety check, which should be done during every shift. This process involves checking the gauge on the extinguisher to see if the charge is adequate. If the charge is adequate, the needle will be in the green zone, but if the charge is not adequate, do not use that extinguisher. Notify the control room immediately if a fire extinguisher fails the safety check. The safety check should also include the hose and nozzle to confirm that they are free of cracks or obstructions. List the steps for using a portable fire extinguisher. The following are basic steps for using a portable fire extinguisher. Pull the pin. Aim the nozzle at the base of the fire from a distance, usually about 10 feet. Squeeze the handle. Sweep the base of the flame from side to side and front to back. Standard procedures. Explain standard procedures for responding to a facility fire. If you see fire or smell smoke, assess the situation. Notify the control room immediately with the exact location and size of the fire, and activate the agency's critical incident plan. There may be an automatic fire alarm, but if not, pull the manual fire alarm. If the fire is small enough, attempt to extinguish the fire using the appropriate extinguisher. Begin evacuation procedures if the fire is out of control, and follow the posted evacuation routes. Make sure that you stay up to date with evacuation routes, as they may change based on location of the fire and the volume of smoke. Choose evacuation routes that allow everyone to move away from the threat as upwind and far away as possible. If time allows, close doors and windows as you evacuate. Conduct a count before evacuation and continuously update the inmate count. Make sure to account for staff and visitors as well, and notify your supervisor if there is a discrepancy. Maintain control of inmates during an evacuation and group them according to classification and custody levels if possible. Ensure that there are enough officers, especially when moving high-risk inmates or large groups. Secure the perimeter and stay alert for inmates who might use the fire as a distraction during an escape attempt or assault. As soon as it is safe, evacuate all inmates and staff in the vicinity. Provide medical treatment to those in need. If someone is trapped or unaccounted for, call your supervisor immediately. In cases of substantial fire involving trapped people, delegate rescue to the local fire department or trained staff. Unit 2, Types of Critical Incidents. Lesson 9, Disasters. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to respond to disasters. Think about this. A tropical storm causes an entire cell block to flood. How would you safely evacuate inmates to another location? Disasters are always considered critical incidents, and they can strike at any moment for any reason. However, with proper planning ahead of time, their damage can be minimized. Disasters tend to fall into two categories: natural disasters or human-instigated disasters. You will need to know the difference between them to prepare and respond appropriately when a disaster impacts the facility. Differentiate between natural disasters and human-instigated disasters. A natural disaster is an event or force of nature that has catastrophic consequences, such as a hurricane, earthquake, tornado, flood, lightning, or wildfire. It is unpredictable and unplanned. A human-instigated disaster is a consequence of technological or human hazards that brings great damage, loss, or destruction, such as chemical spills, a water main breaking, a plane crash, a train derailment, or a fire. It may be intentional or accidental. Equipment. Identify the necessary equipment for responding to a disaster. The equipment used to address a disaster will depend upon the type of disaster and its severity. Each agency may have resources designated for different disasters, but outside agencies may also be called upon to assist. Properly identifying the disaster and methods of communication plays a vital role in responding to a critical incident. Equipment needed in a disaster includes the following: backup communications equipment, backup power source, flashlights with batteries, non-perishable emergency food supplies, stored water, medical supplies, tents or temporary shelters, temporary facilities such as portable toilets, additional bedding or linens, vehicles, weapons. You must be properly trained and familiar with the equipment you may use during a disaster. Each facility will determine the focus and level of training for equipment use. If communications are disrupted, use backup communication systems such as a temporary or mobile command center. You may also need to use secondary radio systems. Be prepared to administer first aid to ill or injured staff and inmates and to distribute drinkable water and emergency food supplies. The facility may be operating only off of generators and not at full power. If necessary, erect temporary shelters. In the case of an evacuation, multiple vehicles will be used. Standard procedures. The nature and extent of the disaster will determine what procedures to follow. Follow your agency's critical incident plan, which will address the procedures for enhanced security measures and transportation needs that could arise. Standard procedures for responding to a disaster include the following: verifying and communicating the critical incident by notifying the control room or a supervisor of the disaster, conducting an inmate count, accounting for all inmates and staff, inspecting for structural damage, making sure there is no breach in the perimeter, activating the critical incident plan, evacuating everyone to a safe place, providing first aid and medical treatment, documenting the disaster, debriefing after the disaster. Unit 3, On-Scene Management. Lesson 1. Protecting the Scene and Evidence. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to protect and control a crime scene. Think about this. An inmate is found dead on the floor, and blood surrounds the body. A weapon is on the floor nearby. How should the first responding officer preserve the crime scene? Although you will not conduct criminal investigations as a correctional officer, you still need to know the procedures for responding to a crime. Different crimes may require different responses. For example, an inmate stealing another inmate's property may result in an incident report, but an inmate stealing keys will result in a facility-wide lockdown and a thorough search. Some crimes in the facility will be crimes against persons, such as assault, theft, or battery. Any sexual assaults are considered violations of PREEA, and all PREA standards must be followed. In such cases, you may also need to temporarily isolate the sexual assault victim in a dry cell without running water to prevent them from cleaning themselves and getting rid of potential evidence. Keep in mind that, even if there is a crime, there may not always be a crime scene involved. If you do come across a crime scene, however, you must take immediate steps to control the crime scene and preserve evidence that could later be used in an investigation. It is crucial that you follow the proper protocol as well as your agency's policies and procedures. Not doing so could result in failure to prosecute a suspect in court. Responding to the crime scene. Identify which staff to notify when a crime has occurred. Notify a supervisor, medical staff, or control room staff immediately if you suspect a crime has been committed and that there is a potential crime scene involved. Inform them of the location of the crime scene area using a radio, phone, or verbal communication. Be aware that authorities and divisions, such as medical staff, may be informed simultaneously. Outside agencies, such as local law enforcement, may also be contacted. If known, report the type of crime as well as the severity, any injuries, and the location where the crime may have occurred. If necessary, make requests for assistance or backup. Provide the names of inmates and staff who were in the area, and mention any details such as blood spatter or weapons. Before entering the crime scene, you must first determine if the area is safe by visually scanning the area, listening for hazards, and using other senses. Make sure to proceed with caution even if you have not identified any immediate threats. Controlling and securing the crime scene. Explain how to control a crime scene. After you have deemed the area safe to enter, you must ensure the safety of others and try to restore order. Make sure to clear the crime scene of aggressors and all unauthorized people immediately, and take note of all the actions taken. Monitor the area and give verbal commands to inmates to return to their cells for a lockdown. These actions help control the scene and can prevent possible interference with the investigation later. Identify how to enter a crime scene to administer first aid while not disturbing evidence. While you are controlling a crime scene, always practice officer safety. Remember that you cannot render aid if you are injured or harmed. If you must enter a crime scene to render life-saving aid, do not rearrange or move anything. Be very careful not to disturb evidence, such as bloody prints or objects that may have been used to commit the crime. Once backup arrives, and if it is safe to do so, you may then conduct a medical assessment if necessary. You will learn more about conducting medical assessments in first aid. Continue administering aid until specialized personnel, such as EMTs, firefighters, or trained medical personnel, arrive. Explain how to secure, protect, and document a crime scene. Once a crime scene has been cleared of any victims, witnesses, or suspects, you will need to control further access to the area and isolate the crime scene. Secure the area and ensure that no unauthorized people enter. Make sure to tape off the area or create a perimeter or barrier. This can be done by using physical obstacles like fences, barrels, or crash gates. It is essential to place personnel as barricades far away from the crime scene to prevent contamination of the scene by other people. Protect the scene by preserving the area as well as possible evidence to minimize contamination. Documenting the crime scene. Each agency may have its own procedures for documenting a crime scene, including using photographs, still images from video cameras, standard forms, and documentation for items moved, removed, or altered. The officer on the scene must keep a continuous log of the activities happening at the crime scene. This log should include which authorized personnel enter and exit the scene along with the date and time. By maintaining this log, you can uphold accountability and help facilitate a thorough and accurate investigation. Collecting evidence. State how to identify and properly collect evidence for a crime scene. To aid future investigations, use caution and tact while collecting any possible evidence. Each facility may determine the methods and materials to use for proper evidence gathering. Inmates may try to destroy evidence. Evidence at a crime scene is any item or fact that may clear a person of guilt or may be considered proof that a crime has been committed, such as clothing, sheets, bodily fluids, or any other item that could be related to or affected by the crime. Use the techniques determined by your agency to collect and preserve evidence, and be careful not to contaminate the evidence or the crime scene. This involves properly bagging items, taking pictures or videos according to instructions, and initiating the proper chain of custody procedures. Chain of custody is the documentation that reflects how evidence is handled and preserved to ensure the integrity of the evidence. To handle evidence properly, use PPE, which must be put on outside of the crime scene. Correctly document and secure evidence through the appropriate chain of custody. Correctly identify the type of bag or container to use for the type of evidence being gathered. Unit 3 On-Scene Management. Lesson 2. Managing Victims, Witnesses, and Suspects. Lesson Goal. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to manage victims, witnesses, and suspects involved in an incident. When an incident occurs that involves victims, witnesses, and suspects, you need to know how to manage them until a supervisor or someone higher in the chain of command arrives. If the incident involves a crime, an internal investigator or outside law enforcement will be called on to investigate. In the meantime, you will need to do your part to keep the situation under control. Secure the scene and conduct an inmate count as soon as possible. Separate the people involved before trying to determine who the victims, witnesses, and suspects are. Potential victims, witnesses, or suspects may be identified through observation and communication with the people on the scene. It is important to separate victims, witnesses, and suspects as soon as possible to preserve evidence and information. Separating all of the people involved provides clarity in dealing with and assessing the incident. Separation also minimizes the possibility of threats and collaboration that may confuse the investigation. If appropriate and necessary, restrain inmates as part of your efforts to separate victims, witnesses, and suspects. You may need to isolate any inmates with physical indications that they may have been involved in a crime. Look for any injuries, labored breathing, possession of weapons, or the presence of contraband. Even after being ordered to be quiet, inmates may talk among themselves and reveal information about the crime. However, do not begin questioning inmates. An assigned investigator or outside law enforcement will conduct a formal interview later. Place victims, witnesses, and suspects in secure areas to provide a safe environment for the interview process. Due to the potential for liability, do not put victims out of sight and sound. They may need medical or psychological support. Follow the instructions of the assigned investigator or your supervisor while overseeing and interacting with victims. Do not leave a suspect alone, as they could remove or purposely contaminate evidence. If an inmate sexually assaults another inmate in the facility, make sure to separate the victim and suspect and place them in dry cells to preserve evidence. You may be asked to obtain statements from victims, witnesses, or suspects, and then give that information to an investigator. Remember, you will not conduct criminal investigations or formal interviews. While you must not directly interview a person, it is appropriate to let them speak to you on their own if you are in their presence. Document what you hear, but do not encourage a person to interact with you. Make sure that the information you note is accurate, as it may be used as evidence in court, or you may be called upon to testify in court proceedings.